evening, comrades. Today I thought I would come out and put together a video discussing the top 10 most woke Nintendo games, celebrating our achievements on the left when it comes to infiltrating Japanese entertainment. But I thought I would go one step further and go full mask off and start celebrating our glorious communism future. These are the top 10 most pro-communist Nintendo titles. We should get the most obvious example out of the way first. Pokemon is essentially a communist utopia. Free healthcare available to all is essentially a core aspect of the game, and the world itself is completely peaceful, with no wars, with endless resources, and an economy that just seems to have plenty of resources available to everyone. Pokemon is the defining example of what every communist country should strive to be. In Animal Crossing, you are simply given a place to live and allowed to live on a plot of land that belongs to the community. This is, I think, the most blatant demonstration of the most important tenet of communism, the idea that all of us deserve the place to live and that land ownership should be abolished. Super Mario Bros. Involves a working class hero going to overthrow a monarchy. This is, of course, a reference to the real-life historical overthrow of Romanov in Russia, the Tsar who fell in order to lead to the rise of the glorious communist revolution. Mario, in essence, is a symbol of communism. We all know that when the communist revolution occurs, it will instantly lead to a flawless, just, perfect society with no real problems where everything is taken care of. But the revolution needs to happen, and Fire Emblem is a really interesting examination of that premise, of just how difficult it is for the communists to rise up and overthrow the authority figures that are holding back society from reaching our full potential. Fire Emblem Three Houses is a great example of how how someone like Edelgard, who is essentially a messiah of the communist revolution, can be held back and restrained by the values and shortcomings of other people. Edelgard is a perfect human being with no flaws whatsoever and would have ushered the continent into a communist golden age if the stupid lizards hadn't been holding her back. This is a really good real-world allegory to what's actually happening in our own lives, and remains an extremely important cultural milestone for our cause. Imagine everything you ever wanted exists and could be yours if it wasn't being hogged by others who don't need it. You know, that is essentially the plot of Yoshi's Story, in which the Super Happy Tree, which is this thing that gives the Yoshis all the nutrition and all the food they need to be happy, is taken from them for no reason. Essentially, it's just so the bad guys can be evil for no reason. It is pretty clearly a very transparent allegory for how capitalists take away essential needs from the people and just ruin things for their own gain. You know, Yoshi's Story is, I think, a really good example of just the black and white nature of communism versus capitalism. It's very strange to say this, but Bowser is a communist. which is very self-evident by this dialogue in Mario Party 2, in which he says this line before redistributing all your coins completely equally. Bowser is not only a communist in his philosophy, but through his actions. Bowser is essentially a better communist than many of us are. And that really needs to be acknowledged and praised. It cannot be stressed enough how brave Nintendo was for implementing a straight-up communist game mechanic into Mario Party. That should be applauded. One of the things we don't talk enough about when it comes to the communist uprising is how our work culture is going to look. Because a lot of people seem to think that they're just going to sit around and do nothing and let other people work. No. What is actually going to happen when the communist uprising occurs is that everyone is going to go out into a field, they're going to labor until they die. And I think Pikmin really emphasizes that quality of communism quite well. Pikmin emphasizes how society needs to be willing to die for itself. You know, the people that make up our culture, our communist utopia, should be willing to die to preserve it. And I think Pikmin, more than any other Nintendo IP, emphasize that philosophy very well. If you don't know a lot about the deep lore of Star Fox, this may come as a surprise to you, but bear with me here. This is going to need some explaining. So, in Star Fox, the Cornerian army is at war with the Venom army, and you, Star Fox, are tasked with the job of taking down Andross's forces almost single-handedly. Why is this? Like, what is the actual reasoning behind this war? Well, this may come as a shock to you. I'm sorry for ruining your childhood, but you're playing as the bad guys in Star Fox. You know, the reason why Andross was exiled to Venom was because that he was undergoing a number of experiments to make the planet more habitable. You know, in other words, what he was going to do was going to create an ideal society for the people of Venom outside of the Cornerian army control. And if you've seen the Cornerian army, you'll notice something very specific about them. All of them is that all of them are canine. Corneria is actually a militant fascist state that has ethnically cleansed every other animal that is not a canine. And you've seen hints of this in animations, and it's straight up like stated in Star Fox Command that this is the case. But like the Cornerian army is incompetent because it doesn't have enough diversity in its forces. It has relegated all of its important military tasks to the canines and not to a diverse group of individuals that could actually protect the system from devastation. And so that leads Star Fox, who is a fox, who is like, you know, part of the canine genus. Star Fox and his team of diverse pilots have to go out and fight Venom because Fox isn't happy about the fact that his dad died. You know, this is always the context as to like Fox, the character Fox's motivations when fighting Andross is that he's trying to avenge his father. He doesn't actually care about Corneria or the Lylat system because they are a fascist dictatorship. This is a theme in the most openly communist Star Fox game, Star Fox Command, in which Crystal, Fox's love interest, straight up calls him out on this. He only hates Andross because he killed his father. He was not able to see the greater picture. And as a result of that, Fox is just unable to come to grips with the fact that in Star Fox 64, he was the bad guy, oppressing the communist uprising on behalf of the fascist Cornarians. This is a really amazing meta commentary on politics and how these kind of uprisings tend to get crushed by the establishment. But like, the fact that Nintendo was able to do all of this with a children's game is just amazing and really, really should be celebrated. If you wanted to know why Nintendo doesn't produce new Star Fox games, this is why. Actually, a big reason why Star Fox Zero was produced and retconned a whole lot of this was because that this was a very dangerous game for Nintendo to produce. And Zero downplayed a lot of these elements for the reboot, and that is why the series has lost a lot of its impact. If you haven't played Xenoblade Chronicles 3, you should. Probably because this entire segment is probably going to spoil you on the themes of the game and what it really means when you get down to the nitty-gritty of it. But essentially, what Xenoblade Chronicles 3 is about is that it's an alternate reality where everyone's thrown into some right-wing fantasy, right? The idea is that, like, a bunch of hot chicks are, like, fighting each other for all of time in order to, like, generate resources for, like, a handful of people on the upper class who are controlling both sides of both sides of the war. Essentially, this is like war, like a more extreme version of like Warhammer 40K. Essentially, it's that kind of like right-wing power fantasy thing where they just want to kill each other and be violent and be ridiculous all the time. Like, that's basically what Xenoblade Chronicles 3 is. But like, what ends up happening, in spite of the fact that, like, God himself in this setting has established that, like, this is what the world is, people organically rise up and put a stop to it. The most forced right-wing hellscape ever. An environment in which people are expected, to fight until they die. Do nothing but fight until they die. The fact of the matter is, people reject that, and they find unity, and they decide to form communes and establish friendships, and discover things about themselves, and accept other diverse groups of people. This is the first major JRPG ever to feature a non-binary character. Isn't that like a fantastic thing that Xenoblade Chronicles 3 did this? And what's more is that the game just keeps building and building on this theme, emphasizing just how selfish and evil the right-wing capitalists are, right? It is, all in all, just a phenomenal accomplishment what they managed to do with this game. I became a communist because of Mother 3. This is the game that really showed me how capitalism ruins idyllic societies and tears apart families. This is the game that shaped my entire worldview and turned me into what I am today. Mother 3, to me, is the communist Nintendo game. It is not only celebrates our philosophy and our ideology and everything we aspire to be, it does everything that we need our propaganda to do. It emphasizes what our enemies want to do in our stead. While communism promotes this idea of unity and just peace and love and just endless prosperity, like capitalism does nothing but promote misery and just slavery, just for some tokens that fundamentally don't mean anything. People threw away everything for the happy boxes. If that isn't a metaphor for like what materialism has done to our culture, I I don't know what is. Mother 3, I think, is a far more important game than most people realize. And I think its enduring legacy and popularity really strongly demonstrates that this is the game that is going to lead us into the glorious revolution.